So let's talk about kind of a yearly training schedule. And this is just kind of general guidelines. Obviously, it changes a little bit depending on the athlete. But these are general guidelines to make sure that throughout the year, we're able to consistently train and get the most out of that training. So let's start with basketball season. That's like November to March-ish. Obviously, we're in basketball season, so we're playing a couple games a week, probably practicing a couple times a week. We still want to make sure that we get some training in. So once a week, spend an hour going to training, and that's mostly just kind of for maintenance, little adjustments, working on those things. We're not too intense with training, but during the season, we want to make sure that we have that time to kind of decompress from practice and games and kind of work on whatever we want to work on outside of practice. So that's kind of the in-season schedule. If you're doing any athletic performance, it should be mostly mobility, a little bit of lifting, but mostly just to kind of maintain those levels that you worked on in the summer. So March through May is kind of the postseason. This is after the season is over, and this is where it would probably be the best time to kind of take a break, I guess. But we don't really ever want to take a break, because if we do, then we're falling behind people who aren't taking a break. But we kind of pull back on the intensity. It's just been a long season, so we pull back on the intensity. So I would say maybe 1 or 2 games a week, but probably take a break for a little bit. You might do a spring league where it's 1 game a week, 1 or 2 practices a week, but spend most of your time doing some individual sessions that are pretty low key. Intensity isn't too high, and you're kind of just decompressing from the season, but still getting in some practice, working on some skills, keeping your shooting rhythm in a good flow. So decompressing, but still getting in our training so that we're not falling behind too much. Once we get to June and August, right, this is where we need to have an off season. And one of the biggest issues is a lot of players don't have an off season because they're going to so many tournaments and camps and stuff. But the off season is obviously our most intense time, but that's intense time for training. So yes, I want you to do a couple tournaments, 1, 2, maybe 3, especially ones with your high school, so your high school coaches can get to know you. And then maybe 1 or 2 with your AAU team, and then 1 or 2 camps, not too many. I see so many kids spending the entire summer in tournaments and camps, and they're not really getting very much individual attention. And tournaments are about winning games, playing with your team. Camps are about learning skills, but you usually have 50 to 200 people there, so the coaches aren't really focused on you, they're just teaching general. So we need to make sure we have time for our individual training so that we can work on things that we need to work on and not just the things that everybody's kind of doing. So make sure that you're prioritizing that training in the off season. Games and camps are less important than your individual training, especially in the summer and the off season when you have more time to work on those things. And we'll talk about that more later, but make sure that our off season is an off season focused on training and developing our skills and our talents. Summer is also a great time to do a athletic performance program to try and build your vertical, your strength, those kind of things. Summer is the best time to do that. But again, if you're spending too much time in tournaments, then you're not going to be able to effectively go through those programs and build that strength. Now, when we get to September through November, leading up to the season, we kind of have to pull back a little bit because we're starting school, fall sports, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. So we can't train as intensely as in the summer, but these are very important months leading up to the season, especially if you're in high school and trying to make the team. You don't know if you have a spot yet. These are going to be the most important months. So we want to stay intense. We want to have good intensity, but we want to make sure we're nice and consistent. And we want to make sure that we're managing our load and our stress so that when tryouts come, we're in our healthiest spot, where our skills are very finely tuned and we're ready to just play. And we don't have to spend the first month or 2 of the season just trying to catch up athletically or skill-wise. We want to make sure we're prepared for tryouts and ready to go from there. So a lot of times we see people taking, a month to a couple weeks off right before season because they know once season starts, they're not going to be able to, take breaks. But that really causes issues because then they have to catch back up and get back in the groove after that break. And that usually takes them into at least the preseason where they're not performing well and they kind of have to get back into that groove, where we'd rather have them playing in that groove at the beginning and being healthy and ready to go for that long, grueling season by managing their stress, not just avoiding it entirely before that. And then that leads you into the next season. So that's kind of a general yearly schedule. But I think it's important to remember that no matter what we're doing, we have our games, we have our training, and both of those things are important throughout the year. Now, different times they take different priorities, right? So during the season, games are more important. Training is just kind of to maintain and help support that. In the off season, games are less important, and they should be supporting your training and what you're working on in your training. So we have to make sure that we have everything balanced throughout the year. But again, consistency is the key. Anybody can work hard for a short period of time, but consistency is what great players do. And here's just a quick note on playing other sports. I love when my athletes play other sports, but only if it doesn't get in the way of this yearly training schedule. Because again, once you get into the groove of training, that's when you're going to start learning the most and improving the fastest. And if you keep taking breaks, you have to keep spending time getting into the groove. And that's what other sports do. But other sports are very beneficial as far as teaching you new movements, improving your athleticism, all those other non-tangible attributes that you learn from sports. So I love having my athletes play other sports, but it can get in the way of this yearly training and this schedule.